Good morning, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Serrat. I'm a tenure track lecturer at the University of Barcelona, and I will be chairing this symposium entitled Civic Engagement in Old Age, addressing the lacunae of research on this topic by focusing on older migrants. This symposium is the direct result of the European project CIVEX, Exclusion from Civic Engagement of a Diverse Older Population, Features, Experiences and Policy Implications. CIVEX is a cross-national European project made by 5 European universities: the University of Barcelona, the University of Newcastle, Braille University Brussels, Abo Academy in Finland, and Uppsala University in Sweden. CIVEX aims to investigate features of exclusion from multidimensional civic engagement in later life and older adults' experiences of such exclusion, and to identify evidence-based policy responses to address exclusion from civic activities. If you would like to know more about this project, you can go into our webpage, civic.eu, or follow us in our Twitter account. We have 3 wonderful presentations planned for today. I will start presenting a paper co-authored with Thomas Sharp from Newcastle University and Feliciano Villar from the University of Barcelona, entitled Civic Engagement in Later Life, Mapping the Field. In second place will come the presentation by Sandra Torres and colleagues, entitled Civic Engagement Among Older Migrants in Europe, a share-based analysis. And then will be the turn to Pernilla Agard from Uppsala University, who will present a paper co-authored with Emilia Häkkinen from Abo Academy University in Finland, entitled Civic Engagement, a part of the migratory life course of older adults, perspectives from 3 European countries. We'll have then 10-15 minutes for all your questions and doubts and comments and remarks. So I welcome you to send to us your comments using the comments of the Zoom, or to wait until the end of the presentations to post your questions. Thank you very much. Good morning again, everyone. I will be presenting this paper entitled Civic Engagement in Later Life, Mapping the Field, co-authored by Thomas Sharp from Newcastle University and Feliciano Villar from the University of Barcelona. Older people's civic engagement has emerged as a key topic for gerontology and public policy due to its effects on the well-being of older people and communities. We have a number of systematic reviews which have explored aspects of older adult civic engagement, such as motivations and barriers for volunteering, or benefits of volunteering in terms of physical health or mental health. However, there are no scoping study reviewing overall knowledge relating to this field. To address this gap, we carry out a scoping review on the literature on older adult civic engagement with 3 objectives: to analyze the ways in which the concept of civic engagement has been defined in the gerontological literature, to critically analyze existing knowledge on older people's civic engagement, and to pinpoint gaps in the literature and propose new directions for research. We carry out a scoping review of the literature on older people's civic engagement, covering 429 papers, spanning from 1963, the date of the first publication we found on this topic, to 2018. The results of this scoping study has been already published in 2 papers. One paper analyzing the definitions of civic engagement in the gerontological literature and proposing a typology proposal of civic activities. And this paper has been published in Voluntas. And a second paper analyzing current knowledge on older adults' civic engagement and proposing new directions for research. This second paper has been published in the Gerontologies. Regarding our first objective, to analyze the ways in which the concept of civic engagement has been defined in the gerontological literature, we have found that the concept has two main dimensions. The first dimension, called volunteering, includes activities seeking improvements or benefits for others, the community, or society. And the second dimension, called political participation, includes activities impacting on decision-making processes. Moreover, if we combine these two dimensions with the individual or collective dimension, we can identify four different types of civic engagement. Type 1 refers to individual forms of volunteering and includes activities such as prosocial, helping, altruistic behaviors outside the family. Type 2 refers to collective forms of volunteering and includes participation in volunteering, community, or charitable organizations. Type 3 refers to individual forms of political participation and includes activities such as voting, contacting political representatives, or boycotting and political consumptions. And finally, type 4, which refers to collective forms of political participation, includes activities such as running for or holding a public office, working on campaigns, or participating in protest activities or social movement organizations. Regarding our second objectives, to critically analyze existing knowledge on older people's civic engagement, we have found that research into this topic has grown steadily over the last 55 years. And you can see in the slide some main characteristics of the studies published on this topic. Most of them follow a quantitative approach. Most of them focus on older adults. 2/3 of them were cross-sectional, with only 1/3 being longitudinal studies. And if we consider the process model of participation, that means if the paper addresses antecedents, experiences, or outcomes of civic engagement, you can see that most of the papers address either antecedents or outcomes of civic engagement, with only a small proportion of papers focus on the experiences that older people have while engaging in civic activities. Our scoping review also allows us to identify some gaps in research into older adult civic engagement that should be at the forefront of future research. These gaps are classified into conceptual aspects of civic engagement, cultural aspects of civic engagement, lifespan aspects, and older people's diversity. Moving now to the first gap, conceptual aspects of civic engagement. As a result of the analysis of the literature, we have identified that not all the types of civic engagement receive the same coverage in current research into this topic. While collective forms of volunteering were extensively covered in the literature, the other three types of civic engagement remain largely underexplored. In this slide, you can see the evolution of the papers published regarding the different types of civic engagement. As you can see, while research into collective forms of volunteering have raised from the 2000 onwards, the other three types of civic activities remain stable, taking into account their coverage in the current literature on this topic. Moving now to the second gap that we have identified in our scoping review, which we call cultural aspects of civic engagement. We know that civic engagement is decisively shaped by the particular context in which participation occurs. However, our review also shows that these cultural aspects of civic engagement remain largely underdeveloped. We know that most research has been conducted using US samples, with other nations and world regions clearly underrepresented, if not absent. Moreover, cross-cultural research has been scarce and has been carried out mostly between European countries. Here you have a map which shows the number of publications that each country of the world has on this topic, on older adult civic engagement. And you can see that most of these publications come from Anglo-Saxon countries like the United States, Australia, or Canada, with the smaller proportions of publications arising from European or Asian countries, and with, of course, other regions and countries of the world which are not represented in current research on older adult civic engagement. We will move now to our third gap. This is the lifespan aspects of civic engagement. And we know that older people's civic engagement may be considered as a dynamic process, as participation shows variations over the lifespan. We also know that experiences of civic participation are really important in understanding, for instance, individuals' decision around continuing or withdrawing from civic engagement. However, these two aspects have been largely absent in current research on older people's civic engagement. So we think that future research on this topic may address individuals' biographical experiences and changes in civic engagement as people age. Finally, the fourth gaps relate to older people's diversity. And you know that older people as a group encompass considerable diversity, and this influences many aspects, such as who is able to participate in civic activities, the ways in which they are able to participate, and the benefits accruing from participation. So we think that there is merit in exploring challenges faced by marginalized older people in achieving full inclusion in civic activities. Moreover, we think that this analysis will benefit from considering the interaction of age as a system of inequality with such other systems such as gender, race, class, disability, or sexual orientations. We are trying to address some of these gaps in the European project CIVEX. So I invite you to look at our webpage if you would like to know more about these topics. The webpage is civex.eu, or to follow us in our Twitter account if you would like to be updated regarding the progresses on our project. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be more than happy to answer any question or comment that you may have at the end of the 3 presentations of this symposium. Thank you. We will move now to the second presentation of the symposium, which will be carried out by Sandra Torres, and the presentation is entitled Civic Engagement Among Older Migrants in Europe, a Share-Based Analysis. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know exactly when you'll be joining us, but welcome to this symposium and to the presentation entitled Civic Engagement Among Older Migrants in Europe, a Share-Based Analysis. My name is Sandra Torres, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues based at the University of Barcelona, at Obo Academy University, at BD University, and they are from different countries, as you can see here: Spain, Finland, Belgium, and you've met at least one of them today earlier in the symposium, Rodrigo Serrat, who's actually the first author for the paper. Now, I thought I will walk you through some of the rationale for the presentation. So the backdrop for this is the following. Older adult civic engagement has become a key topic in social gerontology in the past half a century. The type of engagement that civic engagement entails, it's known to have the potential to actually promote healthy and successful aging, while also strengthening ties within communities, which of course adds to the attraction of civic engagement research. Although research in this area, as far as it entails later life, has been steadily expanding over the past few decades, there are notable blind spots in their scholarship. Civic engagement of older migrants, it's one of those blind spots, and that is precisely what the presentation will be about, which of course you already figured out if you paid attention to the title. So why focus on older migrants in Europe specifically then? So the share of migrants 65 plus in what is known as the international migration stock that resides in Europe specifically is 16.2%, and it's expected to grow over the next few decades. This is one of the many reasons why both social gerontologists in Europe, as well as migration scholars in this continent, have begun to pay attention to foreign-born older people. And this happened around 2 decades ago. If we add to this the fact that civic engagement is one of the cornerstones of participatory democracy, and that the type of engagement is also instrumental in preventing social exclusion, as I hinted in the beginning, and you add to that also the fact that European societies have been preoccupied with migrants' integration for quite some time now, then you'll understand that it's perfectly understandable that some of us at least have found it rather puzzling that older migrant civic engagement has up until now received so little attention. This is one of the reasons why the Civics project was launched last year. This is a cross-national research collaboration between 5 European countries, studying exclusion from civic engagement amongst vulnerable segments of our aging population. And we're focusing specifically in this project on older people who are receiving home health care, older people who are residing in facilities for older populations, older people who are living in deprived neighborhoods, and older migrants, and specifically non-European migrants as far as the qualitative component of civics is concerned. In this presentation, however, I am focusing on older migrants, irrespective of background, in Europe. So what do we know about the civic engagement of older migrants, not only in Europe, but around the globe? So studies on older migrants are extremely rare. And just to give you an idea of how rare they are, if you look at the literature published in English over the past 50 years, then you'll know that out of 429 papers on civic engagement in later life, there's only 7 that focus on older migrant civic engagement. So it's an incredibly rare type of research. In 2019, Rodrigo Serrat and I looked specifically at these 7 papers and tried to figure it out. Are they from? Which kinds of older migrants are they looking at? What kind of engagement are they looking at? In that review, we noted, for example, and I can give you an idea of everything noted there, but in that review, we noted that only one aspect of civic engagement is actually being researched as far as older migrants is concerned, and that is actually only formal volunteering. We acknowledge that since we published that paper in 2019, there's been one more paper to our knowledge that has looked at older migrants. That paper, it's also on formal volunteering. So what this means is up until now, no research published in peer-reviewed journals in English over the past 50 years have actually brought attention to older migrants' political participation, which is one of the key elements of civic engagement. And civic engagement as a whole has been very seldom studied. So this presentation is actually aiming to explore and compare variables associated with civic engagement amongst older foreign-born and native-born adults in Europe. We're looking at both formal volunteering and participation in political organizations and/or any other community-related organization. The presentation will focus on results of some of the analysis that we're in the very midst of conducting, and we're looking today at just 2 research questions in order to draw attention to this particular topic. The first question is, how is civic engagement in these groups distributed according to sociostructural variables? And then we're looking at whether or not the included sociostructural variables that we're looking at specifically now are associated with these two specific groups of older people's civic engagement, and whether or not those associations vary between the groups. Worth noting is perhaps that when one studies civic engagement, one usually looks at the sociostructural variables, but also social capital variables, because there's theories on civic engagement alluding to those. We're not looking into those today. There's limited time and a presentation of only 50 minutes, so we will just focus on the social structural ones, excuse me. Now, where is the data coming from? So the analysis is based on wave 7 of SHARE, which is the Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe. It is excluding respondents under the age of 50 when that wave took place in 2017. It's also excluding respondents from Israel because they have different patterns of migration, and we're particularly focused on older migrants here. And they're also excluding respondents in the SHARE survey of wave 7 that are missing migration-related variable responses. Okay. The data includes a total of 74,292 Europeans aged 50 and older from 26 European countries. And in gray section here below, you can see the countries. 92% of them are native born, and only 7.7% of the sample are foreign born. We have operationalized civic engagement as formal volunteering and political participation using two questions. Have you done voluntary or charity work in the past 12 months? And have you taken part in political or community-related activities? The answer being yes or no. There's other ways to study that, and we are in the midst of conducting analysis, but these are the first two that we would like to give you a glimpse at the kind of analysis we're focusing on today. These are some of the descriptive characteristics of the sample. I'll draw your attention now to what you see in green. You see the civic engagement in voluntary and charity work over the past year. That means the last 12 months prior to 2017, which is where the data is coming from. And you see that 85.9% of the respondents answered no to having been engaging in that activity, and only 1% answered yes. In terms of civic engagement in political community related, you see that 94.5% of them answered no, and a 5.5% answered yes. Now, if you look at the red digits, then you'll see the distribution between native born and foreign born for both types of civic engagement. In terms of the sociostructural variables, then in the case of volunteering, both the native-born and the foreign-born respondents with a high level of education were more active, exactly as the data on other kinds of studies have shown. Native and foreign-born respondents who experienced difficulties in making its needs engaged less in voluntary, also according to previous research. When it comes to self-rated health, both native and foreign-born respondents who rated their health good participated more in volunteering compared to their peers who experienced their health as poor. And all of this is in accordance to what we expected, which suggests then that foreign-born, at least within shared data wave 7, do not show any specific changes in the way in which volunteering and sociostructural variables are actually concerned. But if you start looking at regression analysis, then you start to see a slightly different kinds of results. For political participation or community-related participation, both native and foreign-born respondents with a high level of education were more politically active compared to those with medium or low-level education. In both native and foreign-born groups, people who were active in political or community organizations were more likely to be active in a club if compared to those that were active in such clubs. And in all types of civic engagement that we've been studying, being native born was significantly positively related to engagement. So here you start to see a little bit of a difference on what the stats are showing, and you start to see where you can start to dig further, so to speak, in the analysis that we're focusing on doing within the next few weeks. Now, the preliminary results show, therefore, that older adults who enjoy a high level of education were 2.43 2.48 times more likely to do voluntary or charity work, and 2.7 times more likely to participate in political or community-related organizations compared to older people with a low education. And the odd ranges can be seen here. Older people who did not have problems making ends meet were 1.67 times more likely to do voluntary and charity work, and 1.38 times more likely to participate in political or community-related organizations if compared to people that had difficulty making ends meet. Respondents who reported good health was 1.3 times more likely to do voluntary and charity work, and also to participate in political and community-related organizations. In our next round of analysis, we will be looking at whether exploring frequency of engagement yields different results, because remember, we're only right now presenting results and what people responded in terms of having engaged in civic activities in the past 12 months, what we want to control for frequency of engagement. We're also going to look into whether or not having citizenship in the country where the interview was conducted impacts the results in any way. We're also looking at whether being born outside of Europe, in the case of the foreign-born sample, impacts the results. And we're also going to look into whether years since migration make a difference to civic engagement for the foreign-born sample. These are some of the questions that we will be digging into further. I thank you now for your attention. As I mentioned, this comes out of the project that's called Civics, Exclusion for Civic Engagement of a Diverse Older Population. This is a 5-country project being led by Rodrigo Serrat from the University of Barcelona, receiving funding from JOID Program Initiative. My particular presentation is sponsored through the Swedish Research Council for Health, Working Life and Welfare. So I thank them for this. And we'll also have more information in the Civics actual website. We started the project back in October, so we don't have results yet that have been published yet, but we are going to be successfully changing that. For more information in today's analysis, you are welcome to contact Rodrigo Serrat directly. And he is in charge of the first author for the paper, which is just submitted and in the process of being revised. New analysis, as I said, will be coming forward. Thanks again.
And now will be the turn of Pernilla Agard's presentation entitled Civic Engagement, a part of the Migratory Life course of older adults, perspective from 3 European countries. Thank you for following this symposium.
Hi, my name is Pernilla Ågård. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Uppsala University in Sweden. My talk today is titled Civic Participation and the Migratory Life Course, Perspective from 3 European Countries. Why study migrant civic participation then? Research on older migrants tend to focus on the challenges they face and the needs these create. The social contribution that older migrants make are seldom discussed in this scholarship. In addition, their civic engagement has not received the attention it deserves. These are some of the reasons why the Civic Consortium was created. Civics is a cross-national research project that brings together 5 European countries with a similar welfare and migration regime: Spain, Belgium, UK, Finland, and Sweden. The overall aim of civics is to bring attention to groups of older people whose civics engagement has not yet been studied and whose current circumstances and/or specific life course could offer us theoretically profuse sources of information about how we in gerontology make sense of civic participation in later life. And the groups are older people in need of intensive social or health care, people who reside in long-time care facilities, older people who reside in disadvantaged or deprived areas, and older people with a non-European background who have migrated in adulthood. Civic relies on data from SHARE, Survey of Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe, as well as the qualitative life course interviews. Once the project is completed, a total of 300 life course interviews would be collected. 75 of these interviews will focus on older migrants born outside of Europe who have moved to these countries in adulthood. This presentation aims to give a preliminary taste of what the interviews with older migrants suggest so far. We say preliminary because our data collection is ongoing and as the coding of it. Here we draw evidence from some of the interviews conducted in Belgium, Spain, and Sweden. By offering this glimpse into some of the topics that deserve our attention, we are proposing that the migratory life course, at least when migration takes place in adulthood, could have specific implications for civic engagements in later life. So, does migration shape civic participation then? Our preliminary answer is yes. The changes in civic participation that the interviewed non-European older migrants describe seem to be influenced by migration-related experiences. Some of these has to do with the actual move to another country, while others seem to be more related to what happened after one has moved and starts to inhabit the social position that migrantship can entail in certain societies. The following are some of the reasons why migration was described as having the potential to shape civic participation. Having to learn a new language in adulthood, having to orient oneself in a new ethnocultural landscape, having to orient oneself in regards to the opportunities for civic participation that are available in these new landscapes, having to learn new so-called rules of engagement for civic participation, having to navigate the barriers to civic participation that older people's assumptions about who migrants are, where they come from, and what they bring to the table. Worth noticing is that some of these reasons were described as both enablers and obstacles to civic participation. So the data collected so far exposes the paradox that migrants often face. So, we're going to start by looking at an extract by a woman residing in Spain. She says, voluntary work has been a discovery here because in my home country, voluntary work was just done by rich people with no other jobs to do. The extract illustrates how having to orient oneself in regards to the opportunities for civic participations that are available in the new country could be thought of as migration having acted as an enabler for this type of involvement. So, and the following extract, it's from a woman living in Sweden, and this is about experience migration as an obstacle. Coming from US as a leftist to Sweden, it's unheard of because there's an image of how an American is in the Swedish left, and it does not accept you being a feminist. You come from a capitalist society. I did not grow up in a social democratic society. I think it's great, but I did not feel accepted, and I was busy learning Swedish, so I did not push. I can say one thing I learned though. One thing I learned through the name of the association is how incredible the associationalism is. The knowledge of how an association works and all that is incredibly developed in Sweden. That's something one should not take for granted, that someone who's not from here has grown up with that and has that kind of experience. And then I say, has this been an obstacle for you? Yeah, in some ways. The language, for example, because I cannot write minutes, I can speak fluently, and then she says quotation marks, but to write correctly, and also the bureaucratic language is an obstacle for me, because I've been asked to join different political organizations and become their representative and so on. And I said I can't because I would need proofreading all the time, despite 35 years in Sweden. So the first part of this extract illustrates how some of our informants describe having to navigate others' assumptions about who they are, where they come from, and what they bring to the table when they try to become civically active in the new country of residence. And the second part of the extract that comes after I ask the question about obstacle is an example of how having to learn not only a new language in adulthood, but also so-called new rules of engagement for civic participation. And this is also an example of how migration can be experienced as an obstacle. And this lady says, yeah, also maybe, yeah, you don't know the politics of other countries. It's different, yes. Sometimes I see that people vote, but the one that wins isn't the one that ends up being elected. It's another one. Another one is elected. I mean, with coalitions and so on, you don't understand. I don't fully understand it. And this is an example of how having to orient oneself in a new ethnocultural landscape is described as an obstacle to civic participation. And the catch-22 of migration then. Here is an extract from a woman living in Spain. She says, when I arrived here, people told me that if you want to integrate, if you want to get a job, if you want to be known, if you want to be active, you should find an association that works on a topic and go and you do volunteering work. And here's a conversation between the informant living in Sweden and the interviewer. And the informant starts by saying, I can help in the church, I can help in the school, in their cafe, or in the kitchen. Have you always felt welcome in these situations? Yeah, everyone needs help. I was working for free. Then she laughs. It's all good. Can you recall a situation when it felt extra fun to engage in voluntary work? Every time. Everyone was happy that we came and helped out for free. So these two extracts illustrate how migrating in adulthood to a country with high unemployment rates among non-European migrants means that unpaid work, EI voluntary work, can become one of the options that these older people have to remain occupied in everyday life, which is the case in the second extract. And also how being a migrant could mean that one expects and may experience greater difficulties in landing a job. In both these cases, we see what we have begun to refer to as the catch-22 of migration can be that the way into labor may, in some cases, go via civic participation, EI unpaid work. So far, our data suggests that migration in adulthood can impact and shape civic participation in later life. That migration can both enable and hinder civic participation. The qualitative life course approach we are utilizing in civics has, as expected, the potential to bring important knowledge about the implications that the migratory life course cannot be underestimated when it comes to non-European older migrants' civic participation in later life. We are, however, focusing on migration in adulthood, so we cannot say whether migration earlier in the life course can have similar implications for civic participation in later life. Thus, it's important to end this presentation by proposing that we have just begun to scratch the surface of the theoretically profuseness that the migratory life course offers the study of civic participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for keeping here. We are now moving to your questions and comments. So I would like to invite everyone following this symposium to raise your hands and post all your questions and comments for our consideration. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for attending our presentations. Thank you so much, Sandra and Pernilla, for your wonderful and really interesting presentations.
Somebody has their data platform open.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sandra and Pernilla, for your very interesting presentations. And thank you, everyone, for attending this symposium. We are really happy to have you here. We have received some questions for us through the platform. So my first question will be directed to Sandra. And a person asked about what differentiates older migrants from younger ones when it comes to their civic engagement. There are any specific characteristics of older migrants that shape the way they engage at the civic level?
Mm-hmm. So it's an excellent question. I thank whoever posted. We know there's 30 of you out there, so thank you. I'm a migration scholar as well as a social gerontologist. So the first thing for you to know is that research on civic participation among younger migrants, it's also relatively rare, which we didn't mention in our presentation. So we don't know really enough, and we're not measuring civic participation in exactly the same way that we gerontologists would measure it. For example, gerontologists consider informal help as a dimension of civic engagement in old age, because we know that older people do that kind of help, for example, in spousal informal care. And we would like, as social gerontologists, to put the uniqueness of the old age phase into the map of civic engagement research abroad in all languages. So in terms of life course, there is first the question of the fact that we don't know enough about younger migrants in relation to civic engagement as we make sense of it as far as late in life engagement means. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it seems as if the patterns are fairly the same. So you don't have as many people engage as you would. But the interesting thing is that when migration scholars study civic engagement, they're doing it with tools that are actually migration and ethnicity relevant. Share data, which we are using, it's not a migration and ethnicity relevant share data, but that's all we have in gerontology. So it's the best that we can do right now. When migration scholars study civic engagement, they're paying attention to, for example, how long have people been in a country? Did they visit other countries besides their country of origin, which is what we in share data only have. We're only asking, where were you born? And then how long you've been here. But we haven't asked, have you participated in other kinds of societies before you enter the country in which we're asking the questions? Just to give you an example. So the migration lens is really necessary in old age research. And what we're trying to do is to make the best out of the data we have available as social gerontologists to sort of raise the imagination and expand the imagination of migration scholars so that they can start thinking of civic participation in old age, as a fruitful way of point of departure for their studies, and B, in thinking in a more theoretical, profuse way that is old age friendly, and C, to start to look at how can they measure civic participation in a way that makes sense for the life course as a whole, because they're not interested in the life course, but also for old age itself. And in just 2 weeks, I'll be attending a migration scholars conference and presenting this very presentation. And next time we meet, if you happen to be around, I will be able to tell you what migration scholars make of this presentation. Hope I answered, and if not, just send us another question or contact me directly for that matter. Sandra Torres at SOC, Sociology Department, .uu.sc. Thank you.
Okay, it is good that you mentioned, Sandra, the SHARE study, because there is a question related actually with the SHARE study. And someone is asking, what are the main strengths and weaknesses of the SHARE study when it comes to explore older adults' patterns of civic engagement? And we know that this is a study that has been criticized from a migration perspective, but we would like to hear more about your opinion on that, and also how you envisage a study oriented to older migrants. What the main characteristic of this study would be if taking into account a migration lens?
Now, I cannot see the question, Rodrigo. So first, can you please answer me if the question is about share data itself and what it can do and not do in terms of civic engagement? Because if that's the case, then your civic engagement you are the expert on that. So I will leave the floor to you to answer, and then I can complement with migration. So start with that.
Okay. From a civic engagement perspective, the main problem with shared data is that we have only a couple of variables to explore what civic engagement looks like. So we have only a variable regarding engagement in voluntary activities and engagement in community or political organizations. And as you have saw in my presentation, I hope we conceive civic engagement as a multi-dimensional phenomenon. So there are many other activities going on there that are not covered by the shared database. We don't have any indication regarding individual political activities. We don't have any indication, any indicator regarding informal helping behaviors outside and inside the family. So that is something that we need to take into account when we are exploring patterns of civic engagement among the older population. And this is something that it is particularly tricky when it comes to analyze older migrants' patterns of civic engagement, because we do know that they may be engaged in activities that are outside the formal circuits of civic engagement at the informal level, and we also do know that they could be engaged in their home countries doing some kind of transnational civic participation. But I will leave the floor to you, Sandra, because maybe you can provide some advice regarding what are the weaknesses of the shared database when it comes specifically to analyze older migrants' civic participation.
So the main thing that comes to mind as a migration scholar is that the data is it has been collected not on the basis of representative samples of older migrants in each of these countries, but of a proportion of migratory backgrounds in relation to the country and old age segments. That's the first thing. The second thing has to do with the fact that shared data has been collected solely on the basis of whether or not people are able to master the language in the country in which it was collected. And what we know in Europe is there's a large proportion of people who are older adults that have migrated in adulthood to their respective home countries these days in Europe. These people have not necessarily, we don't know, but we suspect that they haven't really mastered the languages, okay? There's very little data on that, precisely because the language that we choose to ask questions to them as social gerontologists continues to be primarily in the language of the country where you are. So we don't have that many studies that have actually invested in, for example, translators or interpreters, or that have gone through the effort of actually translated a survey. So there is quite a lot of problems in terms of who exactly are we accessing in shared data as foreign-born older people, because it could be the most well adapted and the ones that have been here the longest in Europe. But it could also be that we are not asking questions that might make sense to the other migrants who do not fit that category. So that's one of the main things to say about that. Then the fact that shared data, it's not really a migration friendly. It doesn't ask questions about ethnicity. It doesn't ask enough questions about citizenship. It doesn't have enough questions about participation throughout life, before and after migration, for example. So it doesn't have that migratory life course per se. And it can't, and I'm putting the hat of migration scholar rather than gerontologist, it can lead to very skewed misinterpretation about who foreign-born older adults are. And if we're basing our recommendations to policymakers in aging and old age research and ways of elder care on shared data and what it says about foreign-born, I don't know what to say, but I guess you can see my face. It is really, really problematic, but it is the best data that we can do at a European-wide perspective to start to tap into certain questions and therefore lay the ground for new researchers interested in our topic to start to dig further. So what we're doing right now in the Civics project is basically doing a survey when it comes to civic participation by focusing on the groups that nobody has focused on so far, and then saying this is how far the data that we have can get us. This is where we need to dig further based on what we know about those specific vulnerable groups, the 4 groups that we already presented, in that literature on those groups, and then what we are finding out with all of the limitations that shared data can do, or even our qualitative interviews. Because one of the things that we're facing is that we're doing qualitative interviews, we're focusing on non-European migrants, but we don't have the money to use translators. So again, because of infrastructure problems, we're facing exactly the same problem that SHARE colleagues faced when they designed SHARE. But we're doing the best we can. And the main thing is to put civic participation of these groups, not only all the migrants, which we focus on today, but other groups that are not being actually feeding into the literature and civic participation on the map of social gerontologists, on the map of the other kinds of scholars that are working on these issues, and to lay the ground to say, where can we go theoretically and empirically to move these populations' understandings of civic engagement, or our understandings of them in relation to those populations, in a more theoretically profuse way, that it is in fact in tune with those populations.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandra, for your answer, which is really clear from my perspective. It is good that you also mentioned the interviews, the live course interviews, because we have a couple of questions for Pernilla. So the first question is if you have found anything that you didn't expect to find in the interviews about older migrant civic participation. And the second one, which is related to this one, that's why I am asking this second question right now. It is that we know that you are working with preliminary data, but there are any take-home message that you can derive from your analysis for policymakers, for instance?
Yeah, thank you, Rodrigo. That's two good questions. And if I start with the first question, what I found to be surprising or unexpected, I think I mentioned in the presentation what we are beginning to talk about as the catch-22 of migration, because I was really surprised that so many of my informants talked so much about volunteering and doing so much voluntary work when they were not, and they are not like, but they had also like trouble getting a formal job or getting paid. And I was thinking that maybe we have something to learn from the civic society here, how to take care of migrants and like make use of the enormous capacity that they seem to have and seem to want to contribute to society with. So that's something that I really found to be interesting. And also, this was also mentioned in my interviews conducted in Sweden, but as well in Spain. So I think it's not something that we just see here in Sweden. So it's going to be interesting to see where that takes us when all of the interviews are conducted. So far, I think we're having done like a third of the interviews on the migration group. So we still have quite a long way to go, and before we can give you any results that we are more certain about. And maybe the take-home message would be to look closer at how the civic society works with all the migrants. And
Okay, thank you so much, Pernilla. And taking into account the results of the quantitative study, Sandra, do you have any take-home message for policymakers working with older migrants? You are on mute, Sandra.
Sorry, technique. One of the take-home messages, which I didn't quite think about it necessarily myself, but that I received as a reaction for practitioners and policymakers that we just met at the Nordic Congress of Gerontology a couple of weeks ago, was that they found the fact that there was, at least as the data looks like, very little difference between foreign-born and native-born in terms of civic engagement in voluntary and charity work and political community related. So the difference between the groups is not as large as they expected. And that, I think, it's an interesting take-home message to bring, irrespective of all the flaws or limitations with shared data. And if we combine that finding that the difference is not that much, together with the findings from a qualitative research that is now showing that there is quite a lot of engagement that people are involved in, that they have found as a way of contributing to the societies that are now come home, but also because sometimes they don't find paid work in these societies. We won't talk about the tensions around ethnicity and race and migration in Europe. There's all kinds of reasons for that. But the fact that we're starting to see that they are engaging on a type of civic engagement that we haven't necessarily thought about. I personally, as a migration scholar, expected more of their answers to be about political organizations and association organizations, and not necessarily about voluntary work. So as a migration scholar, that has been interesting to get a sense of what our data collectors in the project are hearing on the ground through these interviews, and see that this gives a flavor to the shared data as far as foreign-born are concerned, and gives us a potential to explore further. Because one of the things I would like to also look into, I'm just throwing a thing, it's how do they think about voluntary work? Because the way in which the interviews right now sound is as if they're thinking that voluntary work in the societies that we are interviewing in those 5 countries, it seems to be as if they're thinking it's the way into paid work, it's the way into making networks, it's the way. So it's not necessarily about voluntary work for the sake of feeling useful, it's voluntary work for the sake of finding something that brings something to their table, so to speak. So it's voluntary work as opening doors into society. Rather than just voluntary work as giving back to society. So how they think about voluntary work, what they think about paid and unpaid work are one of the many questions that the civics qualitative data it's given us insight into, which is worth exploring from a civic participation kind of perspective, which I think could be interesting because this is not necessarily the kind of civic engagement that migration scholars have thought about. They think primarily of political participation. They're not thinking of voluntary work. So it is important as well in order to put in their map what foreign-born older people in Europe at least are doing in terms of voluntary work and how they reason about voluntary work, since they are, of course, more interested in integrations, ways to integrate into society, ways through which you can display your resourcefulness to that society. So there is quite a lot here to be said about what the data is showing.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandra and Pernilla. We have only 2 minutes left, so it is the time to wrap up the symposium. I would like to thank everyone for attending. I hope that you have found the symposium interesting, and I hope that you would like to hear more about our project. Remember that our webpage is civex.eu, or you can follow us in our Twitter account to be updated of any progresses in the project. Thank you so much again for attending the symposium. And if you have any doubt, question, comment, feel free to email to us to our email addresses, which are easily found in the web. I don't know if Sandra or Pernilla would like to say something in this last minute of the symposium.
I would like to give a shout out to our staff behind the scenes and the Argentinian team. I've been attending many sessions and presenting, and you've done a wonderful work. We see staff auditorium right now in your thing, but we know how you look like. We've met you before, and we thank you for all the work you've put into this.